China's really at a tipping point, and it knows it. Right through starting in 2007, Wen Jiabao called what he called the 4 UNs. And he's mentioned every year when he gave a speech to the National People's Congress, or every 2 years, because that's how often they hold them. And he was there this September, which is what, 2 months, not even 2 months ago, his final thing after 10 years, and he's made half an hour on the 4 UNs. Unstable, unbalanced, uncoordinated, unsustainable. That's our economy, the 4 UNs. And it's true. And everyone knows it, but the whole place has been stalled for a while. Reforms have stopped. Things have not happened. Who and when have not been able to run the government because they've been blocked by a bunch of people. We'll show you some names in a minute. But the important thing is in the last 6 weeks, it's changed. And if anyone had to pick anything 3 months ago and say, well, this is likely to happen, the Beaujolais affair is, and what's happened to it is, you can't, it's now which happens, the 5th W. Beaujolais is about to be put in jail for 20 years. And it'll be held, the trial is going to be held after the Congress in November. And no one would have predicted that, including me, I tell you. No one would have, but particularly in March when it first came out. It's a very powerful man, very strong links to the PLA, a populist, many Chinese love him, wanted to go back to Maoism in the sense of the face and the name, and many people thought he could be the next leader of China before the 10 years is up, and he would have had a lot of power. He's good-night nurse now, which is the best news I can give you in this room. And I've met him about half a dozen times, and he's a competent guy and he speaks good English, but he's the wrong guy to run the 4 UNs and the shifts that we're about to talk about. It needs ongoing reforms in a whole bunch of areas. They know it, but only the new leadership can do it, and I'll show you who the new leadership is as we go through. But the reforms are going to be around the domestic capital market, the role of the private sector, which is the best kept secret in China. No one talks about it very much, and makes 70%, over 70% of the profits. Most of the private entrepreneurs now fly beneath the radar. The role of the SOEs, and an important number here, there were over 3,500 attempts since 2009 in the GFC to get the state-owned enterprises offshore, right, and buying things. 3,500 attempts to buy offshore, less than 200 have succeeded, and most of those are in Africa. The reason they didn't succeed is they didn't know how to do it, and they've learnt their lesson on that, and they're learning their lesson. They have to professionalise the state-owned enterprises, make it much less political. They know that. They're looking at all sorts of ways of doing it. We won't spend time, unless you want to, a bit later on how they're doing it. And Australia's at the front cutting edge, I can promise you, of how those are done. The SOEs are doing it. And they're doing it addressing the very issues that got raised here before, but let's not focus on them right now. Moving up the whole of the value chain. That's precisely what the 4 UNs are about. We can't just keep doing more of the same. Exporting, putting 50% of GDP into investment through the state-owned enterprise banks who control all the savings, control the interest rates. It's worked for a while and gets you to $4,000 per capita income, but to get to 15 to 20, in the middle class that's about to explode, and there's 200 million in the middle class in China now. The important thing, though, is that they want to get it up to 500-600 million by 2020. And I think they will if they can get past the 4 UNs. And that means a whole bunch of things. Western companies are going to have much more opportunities to do things in China, including New Zealand companies. The private sector is going to have a bigger role to play in China. The SOEs will be better managed and there'll be fewer of them. The banking system is about to be changed a lot. That's the domestic capital market reform. There's going to be a whole host of things that are going to have to happen, but they're going to take an inordinate amount of courage and direction. And the thing that really held Hu and Wen up for so long, and both of whom are quite smart, was they were blocked in the Standing Politburo Committee, the SPC. They were blocked, and they were blocked by a number of things. And let me just go to a slide that I think will pick up something. They all look the same to me, but the point I'm trying to make is those are the 9 guys that got the Guernsey 5 years ago. Only 2 of them stay. Xi Jinping, and I'll tell you his story in a minute, and Li Keqiang. They're the only 2 that stay. The other 7 have to retire because they've reached a certain age, and that's the deal. Now, how's it going to work? What are the things to look for, particularly given all the reforms that they're going to look at, and we'll talk about that in more depth later. If you look back 3 or 4 months ago, it didn't look good. I mean, it looked like that blocking that had stopped Hu and Wen was there, that the conservative leftists and the PLA people and that type didn't want to make the changes. And the SOEs clearly don't want to make the changes. The Beaujolais thing really just changed the game. It really did. Now, it begs the question, you know, did they do what they did because that changes the game, or did he really do what he did? And we don't know. But there's going to be a trial, I'm told, as of 2 days ago, from someone very senior in the government. The trial will be held after the National People's Congress in the middle of November. And it looks like, this is off the record, but it looks like he'll get 20 years. But to expel him from the party would have been enough in terms of getting him out of power. But then to put him in jail and put him in front of a trial, they're bringing back that police chief as a witness, and they've charged him corruption and chasing Sheilas and, you know, naming everything that have nothing to do with anything. But the point being that it's changed the whole dynamic, and no one would have picked it 3 months ago, let alone, you know, 6 months ago. So it's changing, in my view. I know there's a piece of paper you'll get later which will go through all of these things, but in a very short term. So let me go through the important thing here, if I can. It was a corporatist approach, which means we've got to consensualise our views. There were blocking rights. And it was all put together by Jiang Zemin, who still held his power in Shanghai and still pretends he does. But the guy who did it for him was a guy called Zheng Xiaoshen, who was the one who brought Xi Jinping, the new president, in 6 weeks, brought him from the province opposite Shanghai, because that's where he came from too, and brought him to Shanghai to be the Communist Party secretary to replace that guy they've put in jail, the Communist Party secretary in Shanghai a couple of years ago. He was then brought they were forced to bring him, who particularly, by Jiang Zemin's group again, bring him into Beijing, and he's put to the National People's. No one had really heard much about him. His father was famous, one of the 8 immortals, but he was running a second state. His real strength is with the PLA, because his father, that's where he came from. His wife is a major general in the People's Liberation Army. They're the ones that sit on him. And the big fear was we'd get another blocked government, that the corporatist leftists would stay in charge of this government. The key guy, this is the second key point to make, the key guy that is to watch is a guy called Wang Yang, who is the premier of the Communist Party leader in Guangdong, and the most successful of them, and has done a great job in the last 5 years during all these problems, and has had reforms going on in Guangdong. Wang Yang's great strength is that he was also the Communist Party chief in Chongqing before Bo came. So he's got that linkage, but he's a reformist, he's smart as hell actually. The other one is Li Keqiang, who and when wanted to be the president, but they got blocked by Jiang Zemin's guy, and that's why Xi Jinping is there. But no one knows where Xi is. You know, he's sort of a pragmatic sort of a guy. He'll read the currents. The third thing they're going to do, and this is really the most important to watch for in 8 weeks' time, they're going to drop the standing committee down from 9 to 7, which is what it was before Jiang Zemin left. Let me go back to the... So it was 2003, and that's who they're connected with, and that's 2007, and then we're about to see the repeat. Now, what I've done is align them with where their factions were and who's with who and who's who in the zoo and all that. Zheng Xiaoshen stepped down in 2007. He didn't need to, and he gave Xi Jinping his job, which was head of propaganda, head of the PLA effectively as well, head of Hong Kong. But he was the real power force, and he put 3 people in. One Xi Jinping in the top job, then 2 others, the PLA, the new PLA chief he put in, and the new propaganda chief he put in. They want to drop it from 9 to 7 to get rid of the propaganda chief and the PLA chief. And the way they're going to do that, well, 1, they're going to drop it from 9 to 7, and 2, and this is the bigger point, Hu Jintao's been trying really hard for the last couple of months, I'm told now he's there, to become, like Jiang did in 2003, the head of the military commission for 2 years, which will further block the people who can stop things from happening, the changes that need to happen. And so we'll know. Very simple. You just watch as Wang Yang got a Guernsey. He'll go with Li Keqiang and with Wang Qishen, who the Singaporeans have told me for 5 years is by far the most competent minister in the government. He's going in as well. So you've got 3 of the 7 already of absolutely literate, economically heavy, pro-reformers. So what are the other 4? We'll see that played out. But if you get Hu in there running the military commission for 2 years, you've got a huge start. So that's the other thing. So other things to watch for, right? The point being that if you talked about this sort of stuff 2 months ago, people would think you were smoking something. And it's too early in the day for me to be doing that. So the important point I'm trying to make is we're about to see real change. We're at the China's tipping point anyway with the 4 UNs, but no other than a new government with a new directive and would be able to pull it off. And we're about to see some big changes in the private sector, in the SOEs, in Western companies' roles in China. They've learnt a whole bunch of things. And let me just give you one simple example of that. And I'm going up again, not tomorrow night, but believe it or not, and we saw it this morning, there's a concept, not a concept, there's an idea in China called Beijing Hollywood. The Western movies in China have exploded. Something like 20 films, 50% of the revenue. It's now the second biggest movie market in the world, growing at 30% a year. 3D movies, 23D movies, foreign movies, made over 50% of the money of a market growing 30% a year. They want to go up the value chain. They want to get into this. They know they need, now they've learnt they need clusters to do it. Western companies involved. There's two unbelievable properties that I've seen outside of Beijing, 25 minutes from Tiananmen Square, that were owned by Capital Steelworks. Beautiful, it reminds you of San Jose in Silicon Valley the minute you see it. There's only one factory that's been rebuilt, and it's a big animation facility, but the scale of what they've got is mind-boggling. And what they want to do is create clusters with a number of companies. The biggest cluster in China is 20 minutes north of this one, and it's in IT, it's not movies. But they're going to be big in the movie business, and you probably saw in August that both James Cameron and DreamWorks have announced big investments in China. It's got applications for you guys to think through too, big time, because they want to do that. It's going to be a $5 billion market by 2015. The US market is $10 billion and declining. So it's, who would have said 3 years ago that China would be the second biggest movie market in the world? And it's illustration of this consumer business. Now, to pick up another key point in a wider context of the region, there's currently about 500 million people in the middle class, which is defined as $10,000 or more, in the whole of Asia, 200 million of whom are in China. The estimates are from practically everyone, and including me, is that it'll be something like 3 billion by 2020. So it's going to go up 5 times. They need food, they want better things, they want to go, and to do that they have to miss the middle income trap, which is precisely what China's going to try to do. And the middle income trap, just to remind you, is you stay in a business and you don't improve, you just sort of keep doing what you're doing. Philippines did it. If you do it, you just don't move. You've got to migrate up the value chain, and that's precisely why wages have been rising, why they're trying to bring in companies, why so much of the education is now offshore to bring them back and get them involved. Getting involvement with really good Western companies and joint ventures with Western companies that have been in China, many of them for 100 years, but have never had the opportunities that currently are out there, because the government knows the market it's got, the model it's got doesn't work, the 4 wins. It won't get them home. It'll keep them at that $4,000. The Communist Party probably politically would be in all sorts of strife. Their only legitimacy is we can make this place sing and grow. And it's stalled because of the blockages that we've seen emerge over the last 3 or 4 years. Everyone knows what not everyone, but the majority knows of the policy leaders knows what needs to be done, but there's got to be decisions made and ongoing reforms to make it happen. Domestic capital market is the big one, and that'll have huge implications. Getting the SOEs offshore, they've learnt their lesson. I told you the numbers before, that so few have succeeded. They know they need more professionalism, and they know they need to list some of their companies offshore as well as in China. And they've got to build partnerships, which was something 3 or 4 years ago they didn't think they needed to do, that they'd broken the code. Well, they haven't, and they know they haven't. So the whole thing is shifting, and we're at a tipping point. And in 6 weeks we'll see it, and the only thing I'll say right now is, unlike 6 weeks ago, you can say the good guys look like they're on top. I think they are, and we'll see it emerge. And the guy I look for is Wang Yang, and whether Hu Jintao can get the control of the military commission. Xi Jinping, I think, is going to go with the flow. They can't get rid of him at the moment. I don't think they want to, but he's never been seen to be a Maoist or a guy in control of. So the PLA's role is going to be a lot less. They'll still be there, but they won't be able to block. Propaganda's going to be a lot less. Jiang Zemin is about to turn 87, and he's, good night nurse anyway. But the important point being, there's a big shift going on in China. It's an important shift. It's been done in a way that's unique to China, but it's about to happen. And it's good. It's very good. And it's about breaking the 4 wins and about creating more stability and legitimate. And the party will make some changes. For example, land reform. There's things that will probably happen in the first 5 years on land reform and the hookah system. There's a whole host of things that people have known for a while had to happen, but there was nowhere there to make a decision. And who and when, really at the end of the day, were very ineffective for the 10 years they were there, but it wasn't their fault. And who and when are back in charge, and Li Keqiang is the guy they want to have run it, and he's going to be the number 2. So it's going to be really interesting to watch it. There's a paper you'll get which has got the names and who's who in the zoo, and a narrative that you get afterwards. But I think and I wrote it for BRW, which is out tomorrow, but I wrote it for this meeting because I really think this is the most important moment in China that we've seen in over a decade. And it's a new model that's moving in the right direction and very pro to everything I heard this morning. And I was very impressed with this morning's sessions from you guys. So why don't I shut up then and we'll questions and things.
Thanks, Alan.
I think at this point, because we are pressed for time, I'll just ask Jan Young to just give some reflections on both what Alan has said and your own perspective. You are an MP, a Chinese MP in Parliament, but also previously head of the China Studies Centre at Auckland University. So the floor is yours.
Now, I think Alan has a very good insider story there about Chinese possible political development in China. Now, what I look at is a broader picture, big picture. I thought it might be helpful for us to understand what Alan has just said. Now, as a specialist in about Chinese affairs in the past, now I'm an MP, but until last year I was an academic. Look at last 30 or 40 years, what happened in China and what people predicted about China. Because we are looking the future, right, the big game in the future. In 1978, when China opened up, the Western side, the Western world was, of course, quite pleased, but not really ready to invest in China. But then the Japanese, particularly the people from Hong Kong, Taiwan, went to China. They took the opportunity. Over 10 years later, 1989, there was a Tiananmen Square crackdown. And in the West, people saw the Chinese Communist Party was going to collapse because they saw the demonstrations. So they started to be hesitant to go back to China. But then we realized that China continued to move on. Another 10 years, about 10 years later, in year 2001, now there was a very famous book, or we call maybe not so famous, infamous book now. It's The Coming Collapse of China, published by a Chinese American. He predicted in 2001 that China will collapse. Well, in his book, he said China will collapse in 10 years' time at most, in 5 years' time at most 10 years. So 5 years later, he said in 2006, he said that China is on halfway to its collapse. And then 10 years later, we didn't see the collapse of China, right? So there were many predictions about China's future, all these things. And then we realized that China has continuously been moving on. So if we really believe China will collapse, and then we will miss opportunities. Unfortunately, China, the New Zealand government has done very well. We believe China will continue to rise and its opportunities. So we have been doing consolidating this kind of relationship, and we are now in a very good position to really develop our relationship with China. Now, this about the future, because in the past, China continued to move and reached to a point now it is impossible for China to go back. So Alan has predicted that China will, the tipping point, China will have a better or more reforms. I'm not sure how fast China will change, but looking at the past 30 or 40 years, we'll find that China will continue to move, and I don't think there is any possibility for the Chinese to go back. Now, I said this not only based on the past experience, but also based on the fact that China is now facing so many problems, so many challenges. And the only best way for the Chinese government to stabilize the society and to somehow stay in power is to develop the Chinese economy. That has been fundamental ideology for the Chinese government in the past 30 years, 30 or 40 years. Now, simply because this is a country facing so many challenges, and it's a political system which you all know that not really Western democracy. So how do you stay in power? You need to make sure people are happy, and the best way to make people happy is to have better life. That is economic development. So that has been #1 priority for the Chinese government. And for that reason, I certainly believe that China will continue to focus on its economic development. And for that reason, China will continue to engage the world. And that is fundamental understanding. Well, in that broader context, you can just guess or predict who will be in power, this person, that person. But whoever is in power, I don't think that will change the game fundamentally. So that is basically my understanding. So if we have Alan's information there, put that in the broader context, I believe that we should continue to engage China and just go to China, take the opportunity, and try to make the best use of the rights of China. Thank you.
And a real surprise is there's 93 cities now in China as this urbanisation has started, and we haven't seen the end of it. It just reached 50.1% of the population are now urbanised. It was under 30 in the early 90s. It's still only under 30 in India too, just quietly. It's a very different place, urbanisation. There are still 93 cities in China that are bigger than Sydney or Melbourne, 5 million or more, 93 cities. Only 13 of them have any sort of subway system, example. And they're out in the west, and that's where the people are migrating, as was discussed this morning, the second-tier cities, as they're called, and third-tier cities. But it's mind-boggling when you think, you know, I haven't mentioned Auckland, which is 1 million, so at least Melbourne and Sydney are 4.5 million or something like that. But the important point is there's 93, and urbanisation is going to continue, and this middle income trap has to be resolved. And you see that with the way the education system is run. There's over 20 million Chinese go to university now. It was 2 million 15 years ago. There are 17,000 people doing their postdoctorates offshore. 5 years ago, 3 years ago, you never did your postdoc offshore. You did it, particularly if you came from one of the top universities. But now you do it in the best schools in the world, and you go home, unlike the Indians who don't go home. And the logic of it is that the quality of the education, the quality of the income, the way they want to move up the value chain to break the foreruns, that's the whole process that's underway. And this new leadership team that I think is going to happen in 6 to 8 weeks are going to be the guys who are going to drive it quicker than I think the conventional wisdom has it. They know what it is they have to do, they just have to do it.
It's, I guess what we have, varying perspectives. Alan's sort of focused on the leadership, the personalities and how they are driving things and the factions, and also here from the floor saying the process is basically unstoppable now, it will move forward. So I think between those two perspectives, it's a very positive outcome.